The briefing room fell silent except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across weathered faces. Captain Marcus, Reaper, Voss stood at the front, his steel trident catching the light as he surveyed the assembled personnel. The mission parameters were classified beyond top secret, a hostage extraction deep in Syrian territory, where 3 American diplomats had vanished into a terrorist stronghold that satellite imagery couldn't penetrate. Intelligence suggested a narrow window of opportunity, but the terrain made conventional insertion impossible. "Gentlemen," Voss began, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of countless operations, "we need someone who can thread the needle through mountain passes that would make seasoned pilots soil themselves. We're talking about flying NOE, nap of the Earth, through corridors barely wide enough for rotor clearance, in complete radio silence, with surface-to-air missiles painting every approach vector." His steel-gray eyes scanned the room filled with Apache pilots, Chinook crews, and special operations aviators. "Any combat pilots think they can handle this?" The silence stretched like a held breath. These were men who had flown through the gates of hell in Afghanistan, dodged RPGs over Baghdad, and performed miracles in machines not meant for such punishment. Yet none moved. The topographical map spread across the table showed terrain that looked more suitable for mountain goats than aircraft, razor-sharp ridges, shifting winds, and valleys that formed natural kill boxes. From the back corner movement, a figure in desert utilities rose slowly, deliberately. The room's attention shifted like iron filings following a magnet. She was compact, maybe 5'6", with close-cropped auburn hair and eyes the color of winter sky. Her uniform bore the wings of a naval aviator, ribbons that told stories of deployments most would never understand, and a name tape that read simply, Kestrel. Commander Avery Blackwood stepped forward, her boots clicking against the concrete floor with measured precision. The nickname Kestrel had been earned over the mountains of Afghanistan, where she'd become legendary for her ability to hover motionless in impossible conditions, waiting with predatory patience before striking with surgical precision. But that was years ago, before the incident that had grounded her, before the whispers and sideways glances that followed her through every assignment since. "I can do it," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of every gaze in the room. The silence that followed wasn't respectful, it was skeptical. Someone in the back actually snorted, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. Voss studied her with the intensity of a man accustomed to measuring people's souls. He'd heard the stories, both the heroic ones and the others. The room waited, suspended between disbelief and desperate hope. The helicopter maintenance bay at 300 hours felt like a cathedral of sleeping giants. Blackwood moved through the shadows between the aircraft, her footsteps echoing softly off the concrete floor. The MH-60M Black Hawk, designated for the mission, sat in perfect mechanical readiness, its matte black skin drinking in the dim work lights. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling for the subtle vibrations that might indicate loose panels or stressed metal. This machine would either carry 12 souls to safety or become their tomb in the mountains of Syria. Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Santos emerged from beneath the aircraft, grease staining his utilities and skepticism written across his weathered face. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you sure you're ready for this? It's been 3 years since you've flown anything more challenging than a training sortie." His tone wasn't insubordinate, but it carried the weight of concern shared by every mechanic who'd watched pilots push beyond their limits. Blackwood continued her inspection, checking rotor blade attachments with the methodical precision that had once made her legendary. "Santos, you ever wonder why they call me Kestrel?" She didn't wait for his response, moving to examine the engine intakes. "It's not because I'm fast or flashy. Kestrels hover. They wait. They see everything." Her fingers traced a stress fracture in the composite material, barely visible but potentially catastrophic under extreme conditions. "Mark this for replacement. We can't afford any weak points." The chief mechanic made a note on his tablet, his expression shifting slightly toward respect. "Ma'am, the boys are saying this mission is a suicide run. Mountain passes too narrow, whether turning bad and intel that's sketchy at best. He paused, studying her face in the harsh light. Why are you doing this? For a moment her composure cracked, revealing something deeper than professional duty. Because 3 years ago, I made a mistake that cost lives. Good people died because I hesitated for half a second. She looked up at the Black Hawk's rotor hub, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Some mistakes you carry forever, Santos, but sometimes you get a chance to balance the scales. The maintenance bay's overhead doors began to rumble open, letting in the cold pre-dawn air. Other members of the team were arriving. The SEAL insertion team, intelligence officers and support crew who would make this impossible mission merely improbable. But standing there in the shadow of the Black Hawk, with the weight of unfinished business pressing down like an avalanche, Blackwood felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the fierce joy of purpose. Santos secured his tools and stepped back, his evaluation complete. Ma'am, if anyone can thread this needle, it's you. Just bring them home. The simple words carried more weight than any medal or commendation ever could. The mission briefing at 500 hours revealed the full scope of what military planners euphemistically called a challenging operational environment. The three American diplomats, Ambassador Catherine Walsh, Deputy Chief of Mission Robert Chen, and Political Officer Jennifer Martinez, had been captured during a humanitarian convoy ambush 48 hours earlier. Satellite imagery showed them being held in a medieval fortress carved into a mountain peak, accessible only by a single winding road or by air through passages that looked like knife cuts in the stone. Captain Voss spread detailed topographical charts across the briefing table, his finger tracing the proposed flight path. The target facility sits at 8,000 feet elevation, surrounded by peaks reaching 12,000. Weather reports show shifting winds up to 60 knots, temperature inversions, and the possibility of severe turbulence. He looked directly at Blackwood. The approach corridor is designated Widowmaker for obvious reasons. It's a 30-degree climbing turn through a gap, barely 60 feet wider than your rotor diameter. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the mission commander, stepped forward. Hayes had the lean build of a marathon runner and the sharp eyes of someone who'd climbed through ranks in a profession that didn't welcome women easily. Commander Blackwood, I need to ask directly, are you certain about your capabilities? The psychological evaluation after your previous incident raised concerns about decision-making under extreme stress. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackwood felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the ghost of 3 years' worth of therapy sessions and sleepless nights. But she also felt something else, the steady pulse of absolute certainty. Ma'am, I've flown this route 17 times in the simulator. I know every wind pattern, every radar shadow, every potential failure point. More importantly, I know what happens when we don't act. Sergeant First Class Tommy "Doc" Morrison, the team medic, studied the aerial photographs through a magnifying glass. The intelligence suggests the hostages are being held in the fortress's central courtyard. Landing zone is roughly 60 by 40 feet, surrounded by stone walls 20 feet high. If we take ground fire during extraction, he didn't need to finish. Everyone understood that a damaged aircraft in that confined space meant no escape. Master Sergeant James Stone Crawford, the SEAL team leader, spoke for the first time. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd led countless men through impossible situations. We insert at dawn +30. Hostages should be in the courtyard for their daily exercise period according to our intelligence. We have a 12-minute window before guards rotate. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on Blackwood. Commander, can you hold station in those winds for 12 minutes? Blackwood met his stare without flinching. I can hold for 12 hours if necessary, Sergeant. The question isn't my ability, it's whether your intelligence is accurate and those hostages are where they're supposed to be. The weight of command decisions settled over the room like smoke. The pre-flight inspection at 6:30 hours took on the solemnity of a ritual. Blackwood moved around the MH-60M with Santos beside her, both of them following a checklist burned into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions. The Black Hawk had been modified for special operations, uprated engines, advanced avionics, defensive countermeasures, and sound dampening that would make their approach whisper quiet until the final moments. Every system had been tested, retested, and tested again. Collective response feels heavy, Blackwood noted, working the controls through their full range of motion. The aircraft rocked slightly on its landing gear, the characteristic motion of a helicopter checking its own reflexes. But within parameters, how's the engine temperature differential? Santos consulted his diagnostic tablet. Number 1 engine running 2 degrees hot, but that's normal for this bird. She's been through 3 deployments and never missed a mission. He paused, watching her adjust seat position and mirror angles with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Ma'am, I've been turning wrenches on rotorcraft for 16 years. I've seen pilots who could make a helicopter dance and pilots who fought the machine every inch of the way. You're different. Different how? Blackwood continued her scan of the instrument panel, muscle memory guiding her hands to switches and circuit breakers in a pattern learned long ago. You don't fly the helicopter, Santos said quietly. You become it, like the machine is just an extension of your nervous system. He secured the engine cowling and stepped back. The other pilots, they respect the machine's limitations. You ignore them. The SEAL team approached across the tarmac, their gear configured for rapid deployment. Stone Crawford moved with the fluid confidence of a professional warrior, while his team members, Doc Morrison, Communications Specialist Staff Sergeant Kyle Wire Johnson, Explosive Ordnance Expert Sergeant Mike Boom Williams, and Sniper Staff Sergeant David Ghost Parker, fell naturally into formation behind him. Each man carried specialized equipment for their role in the extraction, their combined weight pushing the Black Hawk close to maximum allowable payload. Captain Voss appeared beside the aircraft, his expression grim. Final intelligence update just came through. Weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. You're going to be flying through cloud cover for the last 20 miles of approach. He handed Blackwood a sealed envelope. Updated extraction point coordinates. The fortress courtyard is smaller than we thought, 50 by 30 feet, not 60 by 40. Blackwood absorbed this information without changing expression, but Santos saw her knuckles whiten slightly as she gripped the collective. 10 fewer feet of margin for error in winds that could shift 60 knots in seconds. The mathematics of survival had just become significantly more complex. Sir, recommend we abort and wait for better conditions, Stone Crawford said, his tactical mind calculating probabilities and risk factors. Negative, Voss replied. Intelligence indicates the hostages may be moved to a secondary location within 24 hours. We go now, or we may not get another chance. The moment of final commitment had arrived. Blackwood looked at her crew, her passengers, and the machine that would carry them all into legend or disaster. The startup sequence began at 700 hours as the eastern horizon showed the first hint of dawn. Blackwood's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, bringing the Black Hawk's twin General Electric T-700 engines online. The familiar whine of turbines spooling up filled the cockpit, followed by the deeper rumble as the engines reached flight idle. The rotors began their slow rotation, gathering momentum until the characteristic whop-whop-whop of rotor blades cutting through morning air created a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. Flight controls check, she called to her co-pilot, Captain Derek Razor Martinez, whose lean frame and nervous energy made him seem perpetually coiled for action. Martinez was young, talented, and had volunteered for this mission despite being told it was likely one way. His hands moved to duplicate her control inputs, the helicopter responding with precise mechanical sympathy. Controls check good, Martinez replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. All engine parameters nominal, defensive systems armed and ready. The aircraft's countermeasures could theoretically defeat most surface-to-air missiles, but in the confined mountain passes they'd be flying through, there might not be enough space for evasive maneuvers. In the cabin behind them, the SEAL team performed final equipment checks with the methodical precision of men who understood that forgotten details killed. Stone Crawford's voice came through the intercom system. "Insertion team ready. We're looking at 12 minutes from touchdown to extraction, assuming the hostages are where intelligence says they are." The tower cleared them for departure, and Blackwood pulled collective, feeling the familiar sensation as the Black Hawk's weight transferred from landing gear to rotor disc. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the pre-dawn darkness, navigation lights painting small constellations against the star-filled sky. Below them, the base grew smaller, becoming just another cluster of lights in a landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. "Kestrel, this is base control," came the voice of Lieutenant Colonel Hayes through their encrypted communications. "You are cleared to Navigation Point Alpha. Weather update shows increasing winds and cloud cover building over the target area. Current conditions at the fortress show visibility dropping to less than half a mile." Blackwood adjusted their heading, the Black Hawk responding to control inputs with the sensitivity of a high-performance sports car. The aircraft was flying heavy with fuel and passengers, but the engines had power to spare. "Base control, Kestrel copies. Proceeding to Nav Point Alpha. Estimate arrival at target in 97 minutes." The mathematics of their flight profile were unforgiving. They would fly low through valleys to avoid radar detection, climb rapidly over ridges, and maintain precise navigation through terrain that offered no room for error. A single mistake in altitude or heading could end in controlled flight into terrain, military euphemism for flying into a mountain. As they flew deeper into hostile territory, the weight of 13 lives pressed down on Blackwood's shoulders like a physical force. Navigation Point Alpha appeared as a distinctive rock formation silhouetted against the brightening sky, marking their transition from friendly to contested airspace. Blackwood reduced altitude to barely 50 feet above the desert floor, the Black Hawk's shadow racing alongside them across sand and scattered vegetation. At this height, the margin for error measured in heartbeats rather than minutes, but radar detection became nearly impossible. "Switching to tactical frequency," Martinez announced, adjusting their communication settings to encrypted channels that would keep their transmissions secret from enemy listeners. The outside world fell away as they entered the bubble of operational security that surrounded all special operations missions. From this point forward, they existed only as call signs and mission objectives. "Kestrel, this is Overwatch," came a new voice through their headsets, an AWACS aircraft circling at high altitude, its radar systems providing early warning of threats. "We show multiple surface-to-air missile sites active along your route. Recommend deviation to the north by 2 miles to avoid engagement envelopes." Blackwood studied their navigation display, calculating the impact of the course change. 2 miles north would take them through an even narrower valley, with wind patterns that could slam them into canyon walls without warning. But surface-to-air missiles were a certainty rather than a possibility. "Overwatch, Kestrel copies, deviating north per your recommendation." The terrain began to change as they approached the foothills of the mountain range that concealed their target. What had been flat desert gave way to rolling hills, then steep-sided canyons that forced the Black Hawk into a twisting path between stone walls that rose like skyscrapers on both sides. The helicopter's rotor wash created miniature dust storms that swirled behind them, marking their passage for anyone watching from the ridgelines above. "Jesus," Martinez muttered, his voice tight with concentration as he monitored their clearance from canyon walls. "It's like flying through a slot canyon at highway speed." The gap between their rotor tips and solid rock measured in feet rather than the comfortable margins they'd trained with. Stone Crawford's voice came through the intercom with the calm professionalism that had made him legendary among special operations forces. "Kestrel, Insertion team is observing increasing radio chatter in the target area. Enemy forces may be aware that something is happening, but they don't appear to know what or when. The intelligence was both encouraging and terrifying. Enhanced enemy alertness would make their approach more dangerous, but the fact that hostage location remained uncertain suggested their mission security was intact. Blackwood felt the familiar tightening of focus that came with approaching combat, the narrowing of perception that filtered out everything except the essential elements of flight and survival. Through her night vision goggles, the canyon walls appeared as ghostly green barriers streaming past at deadly speed. The Black Hawk flew like a mechanical falcon through terrain that hadn't known aircraft since the dawn of aviation. The first mountain pass appeared ahead like a narrow doorway cut through stone giants. Blackwood began a climbing turn that would take them up 3,000 feet in less than 2 miles, the Black Hawk's engine straining against the combined forces of altitude, weight, and the increasingly thin air. The aircraft shuddered as wind currents collided and rebounded off canyon walls, creating turbulence that felt like flying through invisible rapids. Altitude 8,500 and climbing, Martinez called out, monitoring their progress against the mission profile. Approaching the first critical waypoint, weather shows increasing cloud cover ahead. The world outside their cockpit windows had become a study in vertical surfaces and impossible angles. Rock formations that had stood for millions of years created a maze that challenged both navigation skills and basic survival instincts. The Black Hawk was designed for many things, but threading through gaps barely wider than its rotor disc, while climbing at maximum power, was pushing the aircraft beyond its comfort zone. Kestrel, this is Overwatch. We're tracking what appears to be a patrol helicopter in your vicinity. Single aircraft, probably Russian-made, conducting a search pattern approximately 5 miles southeast of your position. The radio call sent ice water through Blackwood's veins. An enemy helicopter in their operational area changed everything about the mission mathematics. Stone Crawford responded immediately. Overwatch, Kestrel. Can you identify the aircraft type and intentions? Appears to be an Mi-17 transport, possibly conducting routine patrol. However, if they spot your approach signature, they'll vector interceptors to your location within minutes. Blackwood studied her navigation display, calculating options with the cold precision of a computer processing data. They could turn back, aborting the mission and condemning 3 hostages to an uncertain fate. They could continue on their planned route, accepting the risk of detection and engagement. Or they could deviate further into even more dangerous terrain, buying concealment at the cost of flying through mountain passes that existed at the absolute edge of what was aerodynamically possible. Martinez, give me a range and bearing to the alternative approach route, she said quietly, her voice carrying no hint of the life-and-death calculations racing through her mind. Alternative route bears 047 degrees, distance 12 miles. Warning, that approach takes us through what the maps designate as Coffin Canyon. Minimum width 30 feet, with downdrafts that have been measured at over 80 knots. The choice was simple and terrible, certain detection or probable death. The weight of 13 lives hung in the balance of her decision. Stone, how critical is mission timing? Blackwood asked, her hands steady on the controls despite the magnitude of the decision before them. Commander, we have a narrow window. Intelligence indicates the hostages are moved to underground cells at 9:30 hours for security reasons. If we're not there for the morning exercise period, we may not get another shot. Stone's voice carried the weight of experience and the knowledge that special operations seldom offered second chances. The Black Hawk continued its climb through the mountain pass, but now every second brought them closer to a decision point that would define the mission's outcome. Through her night vision system, Blackwood could see the terrain ahead, a landscape that looked more like the surface of an alien world than anything meant for human passage. Overwatch, Kestrel. I need continuous updates on that Mi-17's position and heading. If he turns toward our location, I need to know immediately." She adjusted their flight path slightly, taking them deeper into the shadow of a massive ridge line. The helicopter responded sluggishly in the thin air, every control input requiring more force and producing less effect than at sea level. Martinez monitored engine parameters with the intensity of a man watching life support systems. Temperature margins are getting tight. We're asking a lot of these engines. The twin turboshafts were operating near their maximum continuous power setting, consuming fuel at a rate that left no margin for extended combat maneuvering. "Doc Morrison here," came the voice of the team medic through the intercom. "Just want everyone to know that medical facilities in this part of the world are essentially non-existent. We need to bring everyone home in one piece because evacuation options are extremely limited." The sobering reminder hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. They were flying into a region where rescue was impossible, and survival depended entirely on mission success. The Black Mountains rising around them offered no sanctuary for the wounded or the unlucky. Blackwood felt the familiar sensation that had earned her the call sign Kestrel, the ability to hover motionless in impossible conditions, suspended between earth and sky while calculating the perfect moment to strike. But this time, the calculation involved variables that could kill everyone she was responsible for protecting. "All stations, Kestrel. We're proceeding with the alternative approach through Coffin Canyon. Estimated time to target remains unchanged, but margin for error just dropped to 0. The decision was made. Now they would discover whether her legendary skills were sufficient to keep death at bay for 13 more souls. The mouth of Coffin Canyon appeared before them like the entrance to hell itself, a vertical slit in the mountain face that seemed to swallow their navigation lights and radar beams without reflection. Blackwood reduced their forward speed to barely 40 knots, the minimum velocity required to maintain control authority in the increasingly violent wind currents that ricocheted between canyon walls like invisible bullets. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible over the intercom. The canyon walls rose on both sides of them, so close that stone surfaces filled their peripheral vision. The gap between their rotor tips and solid rock measured 18 inches on the left side, 22 on the right. A single gust of wind, a moment's inattention, or the slightest mechanical malfunction would transform 13 human beings into scattered debris across ancient stone. The Black Hawk bucked and shuddered as downdrafts hammered down from the canyon rim above, creating pockets of turbulence that felt like flying through invisible waterfalls. Blackwood's hands moved constantly on the controls, making microsecond adjustments that kept them centered in the narrow corridor of survivable space. Her eyes never stopped moving. Altimeter, navigation display, outside visual reference, engine parameters, back to outside visual reference. Altitude varying between 9,200 and 9,800 feet, Martinez reported, his voice tight with concentration. Winds gusting to 90 knots, direction varying from northwest to southeast with no predictable pattern. In the cabin behind them, the SEAL team maintained professional silence despite being passengers on what amounted to a controlled falling object threading through a stone needle. Stone Crawford's voice came through the intercom with characteristic calm. "Kestrel, insertion team is observing some pretty impressive flying up here. How are you holding up?" Blackwood's response came through gritted teeth as she fought a particularly violent downdraft that tried to slam them into the canyon floor. "Stone, I've flown through worse. Not much worse, but worse." The lie was delivered with enough conviction to maintain team morale, though everyone aboard could feel the aircraft struggling against forces that pushed the boundaries of aerodynamic possibility. "Overwatch, this is Kestrel. Current position approximately 6 miles from target. Request final weather update and enemy activity assessment." She needed to know what waited for them beyond this stone corridor of death. "Kestrel, Overwatch. Target area weather shows broken cloud cover at 8,000 feet, visibility 3 miles and decreasing. That Mi-17 patrol has moved to a position approximately 2 miles northeast of the fortress. They appear to be conducting a standard search pattern, but their current heading will bring them close to your egress route. The tactical situation was deteriorating with each passing minute. Even if they successfully completed the hostage extraction, they would face an enemy helicopter during their escape flight through terrain that offered no room for combat maneuvering. Suddenly, the canyon walls began to widen slightly, offering their first glimpse of sky in 12 minutes of stone-walled flight. The canyon exit opened before them like a gift from a benevolent god, revealing a landscape of rolling hills and scattered peaks under a sky beginning to show the pale light of dawn. Blackwood felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying flow out of her shoulders as the Black Hawk emerged from its stone prison into relatively open airspace. The aircraft seemed to sigh with relief as turbulence decreased and control authority returned to normal parameters. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," Martinez breathed, his instrument scan returning to normal patterns after 12 minutes of survival flying. Engine temps coming down to normal ranges. Fuel state still adequate for mission completion with minimal reserve. Stone Crawford's voice carried a note of professional appreciation. "Commander, that was some of the finest flying I've ever seen. When we get home, drinks are on me." The simple words carried weight among warriors who understood that survival often depended on the skills of others. "Stone, let's complete the mission before we start celebrating," Blackwood replied, but her tone held warmth that had been absent during the canyon transit. The Black Hawk was flying smoothly now, responding to control inputs with mechanical precision as they approached the final phase of their approach. "Kestrel, this is Overwatch. Target area coming up on your nose, bearing 020 degrees, distance 4 miles. Cloud cover is building rapidly. Recommend immediate approach before visibility drops below minimums." Through the morning haze, the medieval fortress began to materialize on a peak that rose like a stone finger pointing toward heaven. Built centuries ago by forgotten armies, it commanded views in all directions and offered natural defenses that had been enhanced by modern military engineering. Guard towers showed the distinctive signatures of electronic surveillance equipment, while the central courtyard, barely visible through swirling morning mist, represented the smallest landing zone any of them had ever attempted. "Target acquired," Blackwood announced, her voice shifting into the clipped professional tone that indicated complete focus on the mission objective. "Beginning final approach. All stations prepare for insertion." The Black Hawk began a descending spiral that would bring them down through the cloud cover and into the fortress courtyard, with minimal exposure to ground-based defenses. But the approach required flying through a gap between guard towers that measured less than 60 feet wide, while dealing with winds that could shift direction and velocity without warning. Martinez called out their descent parameters. Passing through 8,500 feet, rate of descent 1,000 feet per minute, forward speed 30 knots and decreasing. The aircraft was flying at the absolute minimum velocity required to maintain control, balanced on the edge of aerodynamic disaster. "Dock, Ghost, Boom, Wire, prepare for immediate deployment," Stone Crawford ordered. "Remember, we have 12 minutes from touchdown to extraction. No time for heroics, no time for complications." Below them, the fortress courtyard appeared through breaks in the cloud cover, a postage stamp of open space, surrounded by stone walls and medieval architecture that had witnessed centuries of warfare. The final approach began at exactly 8:27 hours, with visibility dropping to less than half a mile and winds gusting across the fortress courtyard from multiple directions. Blackwood initiated a steep descending turn that would bring the Black Hawk down through the narrow gap between guard towers, threading between stone structures with clearances that challenged both her skills and the helicopter's mechanical capabilities. 50 feet above touchdown, winds from the northwest at 45 knots, gusting to 60, Martinez called out, his voice steady despite the white-knuckle approach they were executing. The Black Hawk shuddered and bucked as conflicting wind currents caught the rotor disc, trying to push them into the fortress walls. Through her targeting system, Blackwood could see the courtyard clearly now, and the three figures in civilian clothes huddled against the far wall under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Ambassador Walsh, Deputy Chief Chen, and Political Officer Martinez were exactly where intelligence had predicted they would be, but their physical condition was impossible to assess from altitude. "Tally 3 individuals in the courtyard, northeast corner," reported Ghost Parker, the team sniper whose telescopic sights provided enhanced visual reconnaissance. "Multiple guards visible on the ramparts. Count 6 hostiles with automatic weapons. Positions suggest they're not expecting aerial assault." Stone Crawford's voice crackled through the intercom. "Kestrel, can you hold a stable hover in these conditions?" The question carried enormous weight. The entire mission depended on her ability to maintain position accuracy within inches, while wind conditions tried to slam them into medieval stonework. "Stone, I can hold until the mountains fall down," Blackwood replied, her hands moving constantly on the controls as she fought the Black Hawk into the narrow courtyard space. The aircraft descended through the gap between guard towers with rotor tip clearances measured in feet, the stone walls seeming to reach out like grasping fingers. 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. Martinez counted down their altitude as the helicopter settled toward the ancient stone pavement. Rotor wash created a dust storm that obscured vision and turned the air into a brown fog filled with debris and medieval mortar dust. "Contact," Stone Crawford announced as the Black Hawk's wheels touched stone. Instantly, the SEAL team poured out of the cabin doors, their movements precise and coordinated despite the chaos of rotor wash and swirling dust. Doc Morrison sprinted toward the hostages while Ghost Parker and Boom Williams established security perimeters. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the ramparts above, muzzle flashes strobing through the morning mist as fortress guards responded to the unexpected assault. Bullets sparked off stone walls and ricocheted through the courtyard with deadly randomness. Taking fire from multiple positions, Wire Johnson reported through his radio, his voice competing with the staccato rhythm of gunfire and the thunderous noise of helicopter rotors echoing off stone walls. The 12-minute extraction window had just become a countdown to survival or death. The courtyard erupted into controlled chaos as Doc Morrison reached the hostages. Ambassador Walsh was conscious but appeared to have a broken arm, while Deputy Chief Chen showed signs of severe dehydration and possible internal injuries. Political Officer Martinez seemed to be in the best condition, supporting her fellow captives despite her own obvious exhaustion and injuries. "We've got 3 walking wounded," Doc reported through his headset while simultaneously treating Chen's most critical injuries with battlefield medicine techniques. "Ambassador needs immediate medical attention, but all 3 can travel." Ghost Parker's rifle cracked with mechanical precision from his position near the courtyard's eastern wall, each shot silencing a guard position on the ramparts above. His voice remained calm despite bullets whining past his position. "Tango down, northeast tower. Tango down, eastern rampart. Multiple targets still active, western approach." Blackwood fought to maintain their precarious hover as wind gusts tried to push the Black Hawk into the fortress walls. The helicopter bucked and shuddered, its rotor disc just feet from medieval stonework that had withstood centuries of warfare. Through her peripheral vision, she could see muzzle flashes from guard positions that commanded perfect fields of fire into the courtyard. "Kestrel, we're taking effective fire from positions you can't reach," Stone Crawford reported, his voice tight with tactical urgency. "Need immediate suppression on the western wall, approximately 50 meters from your position." The request put Blackwood in an impossible situation. The Black Hawk's door-mounted machine guns could provide the suppression fire needed to protect the extraction team, but maneuvering into firing position would expose them to concentrated enemy fire while risking collision with the fortress walls. The mathematics of survival had just become exponentially more complex. "Martinez, take the controls," she ordered, her hands already moving to unlock her safety harness. "Hold position exactly where we are. Don't let her drift more than 2 feet in any direction." "Commander, what are you doing?" Martinez's voice carried alarm as he realized her intentions. "Stone needs suppression fire, and I'm the only one positioned to provide it." Blackwood was already moving toward the door gunner's position, where a 7.62 machine gun waited to deliver precisely aimed destruction. It had been 3 years since she'd fired in combat, but muscle memory guided her hands to the weapon's controls with deadly familiarity. The machine gun roared to life, sending streams of tracer rounds into guard positions along the western wall. Ancient stonework exploded in clouds of dust and debris as modern firepower met medieval architecture. Enemy fire slackened as guards sought cover from the devastating aerial assault. "Suppression effective," Stone reported, moving hostages to extraction point. The rescue was succeeding, but they were running out of time and ammunition. More enemy forces were undoubtedly converging on their position, drawn by the sound of combat echoing across the mountain peaks. The extraction reached its critical phase as Doc Morrison guided the 3 hostages across the courtyard toward the waiting Black Hawk. Ambassador Walsh moved slowly but steadily despite her injuries, while Deputy Chief Chen required physical support from both Morrison and political officer Martinez. Each step across the ancient stone pavement brought them closer to safety, but also deeper into the engagement envelope of enemy weapons positioned throughout the fortress. "Covering fire," Stone Crawford shouted as automatic weapons opened up from a previously undetected position in the fortress's central keep. Bullets whined across the courtyard, striking sparks from stone walls and forcing the rescue team to seek whatever cover they could find among the medieval architecture. Boom Williams responded with explosive precision, his grenade launcher sending 14 rounds through narrow windows in the keep's tower. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of high-explosive grenades detonating inside stone chambers temporarily silenced the enemy fire, but everyone knew the suppression would be brief. "Kestrel, how's our fuel state?" Stone asked, his tactical mind calculating the time required to get everyone aboard and clear the fortress's defensive perimeter. Martinez monitored their engine parameters while maintaining the precarious hover. "Fuel adequate for mission completion, plus 20 minutes reserve. But we're burning at maximum power settings to maintain position in these winds." Blackwood continued her suppression fire, the machine gun bucking in her hands as she methodically eliminated guard positions that threatened the extraction. Ancient stone crumbled under modern firepower, centuries-old masonry no match for precision.